Zeus rarely allows me to test a hero with one of my brood, for I am the mother of monsters, the terrible Echidna. I stared at her. All I could think to say was, "Isn't that a kind of anteater?" She howled. Her reptilian face turned brown and green with rage. "I hate when people say that. I hate Australia, naming that ridiculous animal after me. For that, Percy Jackson, my son shall destroy you." The chimera charged, its lion teeth gnashing. I managed to leap aside and dodge the bite. I ended up next to the family and the park ranger, who were all screaming now, trying to pry open the emergency exit doors. I couldn't let them get hurt. I uncapped my sword and ran to the other side of the deck and yelled, "Hey, Chihuahua!" The chimera turned faster than I would have thought possible. Before I could swing my sword, it opened its mouth, emitting a stench like the world's largest barbecue pit, and shot a column of flame straight at me. I dove through the explosion. The carpet burst into flames. The heat was so intense it nearly seared off my eyebrows. Where I had been standing a moment before was a ragged hole in the side of the ark, with melted metal steaming around the edges. Great, I thought. We just blowtorched a national monument. Riptide was now shining bronze blade in my hands, and as the chimera turned, I slashed at its neck. That was my fatal mistake. The blade sparked harmlessly off the dog collar. I tried to regain my balance, but I was so worried about defending myself against the fiery lion's mouth. I completely forgot about the serpent's tail until it whipped around and sank its fangs into my calf. My whole leg was on fire. I tried to jab Riptide into the chimera's mouth, but the serpent's tail whipped around my ankles and pulled me off balance, and my blade flew out of my hand, spinning out of the hole in the ark down toward the Mississippi River. I managed to get to my feet, but I knew I had lost. I was weaponless. I could feel deadly poison racing up to my chest. I remembered Chiron saying that Anacolumus would always return to me. But there was no pen in my pocket. Maybe it had fallen too far away. Maybe it only returned when it was in pen form. I didn't know. I wasn't going to live long enough to figure it out either. I backed into the hole in the wall. The chimera advanced, growling, smoke curling from its lips. The snake lady Echidna cackled. "They don't make heroes like they used to, hey, son?" The monster growled. It seemed in no hurry to finish me off, now that I was beaten. I glanced at the park ranger and the family, and the little boy was hiding behind his father's legs. I had to protect these people. I couldn't just die. I tried to think, but my whole body was on fire. My head felt dizzy. I had no sword. I was facing a massive, fire-breathing monster and its mother. I was scared. There was nowhere else to go, so I stepped to the edge of the hole. Far, far below, the river glittered. If I died, would the monsters go away? Would they leave the humans alone? "If you are the son of Poseidon," Echidna hissed, "you would not fear water. Jump, Percy Jackson. Show me that water will not harm you. Jump and retrieve your sword. Prove your bloodline." Yeah, right, I thought. I'd read somewhere that jumping into water from a couple stories up was like jumping onto solid asphalt. From here, I'd splatter on impact. The chimera's mouth glowed red, heating up for another blast. "You have no faith," Echidna told me. "You do not trust the gods. I cannot blame you, little coward. Better you die now. The gods are faithless. The poison is in your heart." She was right. I was dying. I could feel my breath slowing down. Nobody could save me. Not even the gods. I backed up and looked down at the water. I remembered the warm glow of my father's smile when I was a baby. He must have seen me. He must have visited me when I was in my cradle. I remembered the swirling green trident that had appeared above my head the night of the capture of the flag, when Poseidon had claimed me as his son. But this wasn't the sea. This was the Mississippi, dead center of the U.S. There was no sea god here. "Die, faithless one," Echidna rasped, and then the chimera sent a column of flame toward my face. "Father, help me," I prayed. I turned and jumped, my clothes on fire, poison coursing through my veins. I plummeted toward the river. And that is the end of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. I become a known fugitive. I'd love to tell you that I had some deep revelation on my way down, that I came to terms with my own mortality. I laughed in the face of death, etc., etc. The truth, my only thought was, ah! The river raced toward me at the speed of a truck. Wind ripped the breath from my lungs. Steeples and skyscrapers and bridges tumbled in and out of my vision. And then, Boom! A whiteout of bubbles. I sank through the murk, sure that I was about to end up embedded in 100 feet of mud and lost forever. But my impact with the water didn't hurt. I was falling slowly now, bubbles trickling up through my fingers. I settled on the river bottom soundlessly. A catfish the size of my stepfather lurched away into the gloom. Clouds of salt and disgusting garbage, beer bottles, old shoes, plastic bags, swirled all around me. At that point, I realized a few things. First, I had not been flattened into a pancake. I had not been barbecued. And I couldn't feel the chimera poison boiling in my veins anymore. I was alive, which was good. Second realization, I wasn't wet. I mean, I could feel the coolness of the water. I could see where the fire on my clothes had been quenched. But when I touched my own shirt, it felt perfectly dry. I looked at the garbage floating by and snatched an old cigarette lighter. No way, I thought. I flicked the lighter. It sparked. A tiny flame appeared, right there at the bottom of the Mississippi. I grabbed a soggy hamburger wrapper out of the current, and immediately the paper turned dry. I lit it with no problem. As soon as I let go, the flames sputtered out, and the wrapper turned back to a slimy, wet rag. Weird. But the strangest thought occurred to me last. I was breathing. I was underwater, and I was breathing normally. I stood up, thigh deep in mud. My legs felt shaky. My hands trembled. I should have been dead. The fact that I wasn't seemed, well, like a miracle. I imagined a woman's voice, a voice that sounded a bit like my mother. Percy, what do you say? Thanks? Underwater, I sounded it like I did on recordings, like a much older kid. Thank you, Father. No response, just a dark drift of garbage downriver. The enormous catfish gliding by, the flash of sunset on the water's surface far above, turning everything the color of butterscotch. Why had Poseidon saved me? The more I thought about it, the more ashamed I felt. I'd gotten lucky a few times before. Against a thing like the chimera, I had never stood a chance. Those poor people in the ark were probably toast. I couldn't protect them. I was no hero. Maybe I should just stay down here with the catfish, join the bottom feeders. Foom, foom, foom. A riverboat's paddle wheel turned above me, swirling the silt around me. There, not 5 feet in front of me, was my sword, its gleaming bronze hilt stuck up in the mud. I heard a woman's voice again. Percy, take the sword. Your father believes in you. This time I knew the voice wasn't my mother. And I knew the voice wasn't in my head either. I wasn't imagining it. Her words seemed to come from somewhere, rippling through the water, like dolphin sonar. Where are you? I called aloud. Then, through the gloom, I saw her, a woman, the color of the water. A ghost in the current, floating above the sword. She had long, billowing hair, and her eyes, barely visible, were green like mine. A lump formed my throat. Mom? No, child, only a messenger. Though your mother's fate is not yet hopeless as you believe. Go to the beach in Santa Monica. What? It is your father's will. Before you descend to the underworld, you must go to Santa Monica, please. Percy, I cannot stay long. The river here is too foul for my presence. But I was sure this woman was my mother, or a vision of her anyway. How did you... There was so much I wanted to ask. The words jammed up in my throat. I cannot stay, brave one, the woman said. She reached out and I felt the current brush my face like a caress. You must go to Santa Monica, and Percy, do not trust the gifts. Her voice faded. Gifts? I asked. What gifts? Wait. She made one more attempt to speak, but the sound was gone. Her image melted away. If it was my mother, I had lost her again. I felt like drowning myself. The only problem, I was immune to drowning. Your father believes in you, she had said. She'd also called me brave, unless she was talking to the catfish. I waded toward Riptide and I grabbed it by the hilt. The chimera might still be up there with its snaky, fat mother, waiting to finish me off. At the very least, the mortar police would be arriving, trying to figure out who had blown a hole in the ark. If they found me, they'd have some questions. I capped my sword, stuck the ballpoint pen in my pocket. Thank you, Father, I said again to the dark water. Then I kicked up through the muck and swam for the surface. I came ashore next to a floating McDonald's. A block away, every emergency vehicle in St. Louis was surrounded in the ark. Police helicopters circled overhead. The crowd of onlookers reminded me of Times Square on New Year's Eve. A little girl said, Mama, that boy walked out of the river. That's nice, dear, her mother said, craning her neck to watch the ambulances. But he's dry. That's nice, dear. A news lady was talking to the camera. Probably not a terrorist attack, we're told, but it's still very early on in the investigation. The damage, as you can see, is very serious. We're trying to get to some of the survivors. Some of the survivors to question them about eyewitness reports of somebody falling from the ark. Survivors. I felt a surge of relief. Maybe the park ranger and that family had made it out safely. I hoped Annabeth and Grover were okay. I tried to push through the crowd and see what was going on inside the police line. An adolescent boy, another reporter was saying. Channel 5 has learned that surveillance cameras show an adolescent boy going wild on the observation deck, somehow setting off this freak explosion. Hard to believe, Ja, but that's what we're hearing. Again, no confirmed fatalities. I backed away, trying to keep my head down. I had to go the long way around the police perimeter. Uniformed officers and news reporters were everywhere. I'd almost lost hope of ever finding Annabeth and Percy when a familiar voice bleated, "Percy!" I turned and got tackled by Grover's bear hug. Or goat hug? He said, "We thought you'd gone to Hades the hard way." Annabeth stood behind him, trying to look angry, but even she seemed relieved to see me. "We can't leave you alone for 5 minutes. What happened?" "I sort of fell. Percy, 630 feet. Behind us, the cop shouted, "Gangway!" The crowd parted, and a couple paramedics hustled out, rolling a woman on a stretcher. I recognized her immediately as the mother of the little boy who'd been in the observation deck. She was saying, "And this huge dog, this huge, fire-breathing chihuahua." "Okay, ma'am," the paramedic said. "Just calm down. Your family is fine. The medication is starting to kick in." "I'm not crazy. This boy jumped out of the hole, and the monster disappeared. And then she saw me. There he is. That's him. That's the boy." I turned quickly. I pulled Annabeth and Grover after me. We disappeared into the crowd. "What's going on?" Annabeth demanded. Was she talking about the chihuahua on the elevator? Then I told him the whole story of the Chimera, Echidna, my high dive act, and the underwater lady's message. "Whoa," Grover said. "We gotta get you to Santa Monica. You can't ignore a summons from your dad." Before Annabeth could respond, we passed another reporter doing a news break. I almost froze in the tracks when she said, "Percy Jackson, that's right, Dan. Channel 12 has learned that the boy who may have caused this explosion fits the description of a young man wanted by authorities for a serious New Jersey bus accident 3 days ago. And the boy is believed to be traveling west. For our viewers at home, here is a photo of Percy Jackson." We ducked around the news van and slipped into an alley. "First things first," I told Grover. "We've got to get out of town." Somehow, we made it back to the Amtrak station without getting spotted. We got on board the train just before it pulled out for Denver. The train trundled west as darkness fell, police lights still pulsing against the St. Louis skyline behind us. And that is the end of chapter 14.